So my name is Mike Friedman. Some of you may know me as Friedo on Twitter, Stack Overflow, Perl Bunks, etc. I have a very complicated slide deck for this talk. This is it. It's one slide. And I made that decision consciously because I was thinking about what to do for this talk. And starting about 2 months ago, I started making a bunch of slides, writing some outlines, doing some bullet points. And I go to a lot of Perl conferences and meetups and Perl workshops like this one. And I've given a lot of presentations and talks and with slides, and I think I'm okay at it. But all of them have just sort of been in the manner of me talking at you, explaining something about Perl. And that's not what I wanted to do for this talk. I want to actually have a discussion, which is why I called it Perl Evangelism Workshop, although that's a different title from what ended up in the program, because I forgot. I originally submitted it under a different title when I thought that I was going to do a more traditional presentation. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my background and some of the things I've learned. And I want to hear from you guys about your opinions on my ridiculous ideas and your experiences and what you've learned about this same sort of stuff. So this is not going to be a lecture presentation. Feel free to interrupt me and raise your hand or throw something at me, whatever you want to do. Because I want to hear from everybody here. So I've been doing Perl stuff for a long time, since about 2000. It was one of the first programming languages I learned, and the one that I still like best, although I like a lot of languages. And more recently, within the past 4 or 5 years, I started to try to get a lot more involved in the Perl community. I started going to YAPCs. I started going to conferences. And then about 2.5 years ago, I took a really fun job for a company called MongoDB. They paid me with this nice backpack that says MongoDB on it. And they said, we want you to do 2 things. One is we need a guy to maintain the Perl drivers for MongoDB, which had been neglected for some time at that point. But we also want someone who's going to be a community evangelist within the Perl world and to tell them about how cool MongoDB is. And I said, yes, I can do that, because I know all about MongoDB, and in fact, I knew nothing about MongoDB. And they said, okay, great. And I had a lot of fun. I worked there for about 2 years. And I had a lot of fun going to conferences both within the Perl sphere and without, because MongoDB at that time organized a lot of their own 1- and 2-day conferences just about MongoDB, and then you get people who like every programming language under the sun. And they'd also send me to YAPCs, and we'd organize Perl meetups at our office and stuff like that. So I ended up giving a lot of presentations to a fairly diverse crowd of people. We'd go to a city like San Francisco, and it's a lot of cutting-edge startup guys, and then we'd go to a city like Detroit, and it's people writing automation software for car factories, but they're interested in MongoDB and they're interested in Perl. And so it exposed me to a wide range of professionals in this industry. And I learned a few things which I think would benefit us as a community for getting people into Perl. And conferences like this are great, but as I was saying before we started, it's easy to preach to the converted. We Perl guys, at every one of these conferences, we always talk about the echo chamber. And I hate to bring up that cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's kind of true. None of you guys need convincing that Perl is cool. So I wanted to share some of what I learned about talking about MongoDB to people and how we can apply those lessons to get people interested or re-interested in Perl, if maybe they left Perl at one point. So, and I want to hear about your experiences and opinions too. So I learned a few things. The first lesson I learned is, and I learned this easily because I think I kind of knew it already, but it was made very clear to me that nobody really likes a zealot. And this should be obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't really seem to grasp this idea. I did one of the first MongoDB conferences I did. I gave a presentation on configuring sharded clusters with MongoDB. And it went fine. You know, it was a perfectly ordinary presentation, boring slides and stuff, but you know, I made them, you know, as pretty as I could. And you know, it was fine, and people found it informative. And then when it came time for questions and comments, I answered a few questions. This was like my second week on the job, so I didn't actually know that much about the product, but I answered the questions as best I could. And then this one guy in the back raises his hand and says, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I say, okay. And he stands up and talks for about 10 solid minutes about how much he loves MongoDB and how relational databases are dead and they're obsolete, and within 5 years nobody's going to use a relational database. And you know, it's one of those situations where you could just sort of feel everybody in the room rolling their eyes. And you know, except I couldn't do that because I was standing up in front, and you know, I'm supposed to be professional. And you know, I'm not going to say shut up and sit down.
Why not?
You know, it's a good point. Maybe I should have.
Yes.
But it was my second week on the job, and I wanted to make a good impression, or what I thought would be a good impression. But you know, and it's fine, all right? And you know, some people came up to me afterwards and was like, that guy works for you, right? He's a plant. No, it's just some dude who's really enthusiastic. But you know, that sort of thing puts people off. You know, for one thing, it's not true. Relational databases aren't going anywhere. It is true that MongoDB is cool. I mean, I like it, and it's useful. And it's especially useful in places where relational databases don't work that well. But they still work really well for a lot of things. I'm one of those insane people who actually likes SQL. I don't know why. I don't know. Writing declarative database queries is kind of fun, I think. Yeah, that elicited silence. But you know, it was interesting to watch that experience because up until that point, the reaction of the audience was really good. And that guy, even though you know he wasn't affiliated with the conference, he was just an audience member, had a really deleterious effect on the crowd, even though he wasn't the speaker. He was just a guy making a comment. And that sort of struck me as profound. I was like, wow, when you know, we were on good behavior, talking about how good MongoDB is, but not putting anybody else down. But this guy, even though he's not affiliated with us, made us all look like dicks. So the lesson I learned from there, which, you know, again, is something that I think I knew instinctively, but that was an excellent demonstration, is don't be a dick. And just don't. And you know what? There are people within our community who have social maladies, let's say. You know, not a lot of them, but I think, you know, I'm not going to say names, but I think a few of you, maybe a few names come to mind. And, you know, thankfully those people don't tend to be very social. They don't come to conferences a lot, although occasionally they do. But it's important to look to them as an example of what not to do. You know, you want to treat people well, and more importantly, if you're talking to a Python guy about how cool Perl is, your job is not to say Python sucks and Perl is great. Your job is to say Python is cool, which it is, and I like Python. But look what you can do with Perl, and look what people are doing with Perl that's similar to what you're doing with Python. Look how easier it is in Perl than it is in Python. Look how cool CPAN is. So I think that message of staying positive is true. And I talked a little bit about the echo chamber. And how that, you know, is fine for us, but doesn't really help bring people into the field. So another lesson that I learned, which was really interesting, part of my job for part of the time I was there was they said, we want you to write lots of blog posts. And it turned out I actually didn't have time to write many blog posts, but I wrote a few. So I said, what should I write about? They said, come up with something cool in Perl that you can do with MongoDB. So I said, okay, and I came up with one, well, a few different projects, but one was analyzing GitHub data. GitHub has an API where you can just download tons of data about, you know, commit histories from projects. And I dumped that all in MongoDB, and I did some analytics on the dates. I had recently fixed a bug in the driver that made date time processing much, much faster because it originally relied on a date time module, but I added a feature where you could make it rely on date time tiny if you didn't have to do actual date manipulation on the data that came back. So I wrote an article about One, getting this information in MongoDB and how you can make like a nice histogram of commit histories and get some interesting information with MongoDB queries. And secondarily, about this new feature in the driver that made date stuff much more efficient, and I put the benchmarks and stuff. And so I started, posting this, and this is just on my personal blog, and I started posting this around. And I got, of course, the Perl people all saw it. I went to, Reddit r/Perl and put it there, put it on Twitter, hashtag Perl, so people saw it. But what was interesting, I started, looking at the referrals. Most of the traffic that was reading the blog were people who were coming there from pages about MongoDB. And this is when the light bulb sort of went off in my head. I said, aha, these guys, the Perl people, of course, they're going to see it because, our community is small. But these are people who are interested in MongoDB, and they want to know how this datetime stuff works. And for them, the language is really incidental. And so what I learned is that if you're going to write blog posts about Perl, don't just write about what you can do with Perl and say, hey, this is some cool stuff you can do with Perl. Write about what you can do with Perl working with other technologies that people outside the community are interested in. That's where you get what the marketing majors call synergy. And I found that this strategy worked really well. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to write a lot of posts, but I wrote like 3 or 4, sort of all about what you can do with MongoDB and Perl. And those, to this day, are still the most hit pages on my blog. And I don't work for MongoDB anymore, but I'm trying to continue that strategy. I've been, really silent on the blogging front, unfortunately, just because I've been super busy with other stuff. But I'm working on a post now, which I hope to publish next week, which is about creating animated SVG graphics in Perl. And this is not for a job or anything. I was trying to make an animation for something that I just wanted to demonstrate. I was helping the son of my neighbor with his trigonometry homework, and I wanted to make an animation showing a radius going counterclockwise around a circle and how that generates the sine and cosine functions. And I made it using Perl and some trig functions, and I figured out SVG. And I'd never done anything with SVG before, but I found out that it supports animation, and there's a Perl module for it that makes animating things really cool. You just say, here's a line, and I want it to go from here to here in so many seconds, and it just works, and it's cool. So I have a post about that, and I expect the Perl people will like it. But there's also going to be some interest for people who are interested in SVG or vector graphics in general or animation in general. So I plan to spam the hell out of Reddit, on subreddits that I never go into. Like I'm sure there's like a vector graphics Reddit and an animation Reddit, and say, hey, here's how do you generate animated SVGs programmatically, and they'll read it and they'll say, hey, look at that, he's doing it in Perl. So I think those are the big lessons about getting people from outside the community in. And another thing, the third thing, so those are the first 2 things, and there are 3 things that I wanted to talk about. And then I want to hear from you guys, because you've all been silent, except for the occasional nervous giggle. But I want to hear, but I want to hear, so I want to hear a little bit from you guys later. But the third thing is we were talking a little bit before we started about some of the conferences, the non-Perl conferences, but the more general conferences, like OSCON, which has always had a Perl track. It's been somewhat neglected in recent years, but other conferences like I was talking about Open West, which I think last year had a Perl track for the first time and was really successful, and that's a general open source conference. Other conferences, of a general nature that maybe ignored Perl for a long time, working hard to get into those conferences. Open Source Bridge is another good one that I think recently they've had some Perl talks, but never really an entire track full. And my experience has been that they've kind of ignored it for a while, but seems to have been picking up again. So if you're interested in speaking at conferences, or you just like to go to conferences and talk to people, which I like to do as well, think about those venues that are outside of the echo chamber. I hate to use that cliche over and over again, but that's what we have. So think about those, and even if they don't have a Perl track, just if you're interested in something that's there, it doesn't have to be Perl, show up and talk to people and say, yeah, I'm a Perl guy, we still exist. And, and tell them how cool it is. Even better, see if you can get talks accepted. A good strategy for doing this is, if you want to submit something to PyCon, don't say, hey, Python guys, I want to do a Perl talk at Python, because they're probably not going to be that interested. But instead, what you can do is you say, hey, here's something we're doing in Perl that's similar to how Python works. And I want to talk about the differences and similarities between Python and Perl. And maybe that'll be interesting. Maybe it'll be interesting to look at how two similar features are implemented in the Python and Perl compilers. Maybe it'll be interesting to look at a library, a common utility like an HTTP client, and say, Python has this, which is really great, and Perl's has this, which is really great, and wouldn't it be cool if they had the same set of features, and here's how you can do this cool thing that Perl does in Python, and vice versa. People like that kind of stuff, even if they don't like Perl. And the really thing about this is if you follow the first rule, and you don't be a jerk, then it allows everybody in the audience to be a jerk and confirm their presuppositions already as they watch you do this comparison and they say, oh yeah, Python is better, but they learned something about Perl. And that I've found can have a really good effect. So those were the 3 points that I wanted to bring up, and I would love to hear any comments or questions that you have, or anything that I can answer, or any just general discussion about evangelism within and without the Perl community. And tips, suggestions. I know you're all a bunch of loudmouths when you go to the pub later. Yeah.
Okay, I follow LinkedIn Paul Johnson thread. A guy put on about wanting to learn Perl.
Yeah.
And the first response he gets, this is a Perl group, is why would you want to learn Perl?
Yeah.
Perl's a dying language.
Right.
Well, you get the point.
I don't agree.
Let's go home.
I don't agree that it's a dying language. It's certainly, it's certainly less popular than it used to be, and we'd all be fools if we failed to admit that. But no, it's not a dying language. And I've seen those discussions on LinkedIn. I don't really post on LinkedIn, but I read stuff from time to time. And I've seen those discussions everywhere too. It's always the first response. And my strategy, I've posted in other places in discussions like this. And my strategy is always to say, look, Perl is not dying. Perl is smaller than it used to be. It's not as popular as it used to be.
May I?
Yeah.
Perl is not smaller than it used to be. Perl is growing. The rest of the internet is growing harder.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't mean that Perl is shrinking. Just like you, I've been to a lot of Perl events in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I've been at the first Swiss Perl workshop, I've been at the first Austrian Perl workshop, Polish Perl workshop, Czech Perl workshop, and so on. And
those didn't exist 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's their second, at the moment this year, it's their second or third year that they're doing that. And man, they are full. There's more people in there than in this room.
Yeah.
And companies there that are 1, 2, 3 years old and starting with Perl. So maybe in the UK, people are switching.
This guy was in Silicon Valley he was complaining about, but Silicon Valley is always the next greatest.
But if you go to Romania,
interesting stuff going on in Silicon Valley, actually.
Yeah.
And
one thing,
yeah.
Earlier this year, I've been at the Cluj PM meeting. There's 150 people there at a Perlmonger meeting. And they organize it from 6 to something like 11:30. Riba has been there as well. It's awesome. 150 people. And average age is below 30, and over half of the people there are women.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. Where's this place?
Cluj, that's the capital of Transylvania in Romania. The region of Dracula.
Yeah.
They have a picture of Dracula as their logo.
Yeah.
And man, this is awesome. If you walk there and you talk to the people, most of the companies that are new. No freaking way that Perl is dying. Perl is flourishing.
And that's true. And you bring up an excellent point, which is the relative size of these communities. programming in general is growing a lot.
Yes.
And you're right, and I think I misspoke earlier. Perl is not smaller. It's growing, but it's not growing as fast as we would like it to be. And I think that's an excellent response to those types of posts. And who knew there were so many Perl programmers in Transylvania? And I've seen blog posts from Cluj.pm, and they're doing great stuff. I mentioned OpenWest a while ago, which is out in Utah. Salt Lake City Perlmongers group, who did a lot of work in getting the Perl track kind of started at OpenWest, went from nothing a few years ago to, there's a couple guys doing now, I forgot their names, but they have an excellent Perlmongers group now. They do meetups once a month. They have excellent attendance, and it went from nothing. It just took one or two guys to sort of reach out and get it started again and say, hey, are you a Perl guy in Salt Lake? Let's get together. And a bunch of guys said, oh yeah, I thought I was the only one. And yeah.
I think our motto with Perl is there's more than one way to do it. And my way of dealing with the Perl is dying conversations is really just not to have them. Some years ago we started a group in Milton Keynes, which is close to London, a small city, about 250,000 people. And we thought there was about 4 Perl programmers in this place, but we thought, hey, why not start a group? And then loads more people showed up. And they were like, hey, I didn't know anyone else did Perl. So we can, I think by having these discussions, sometimes it's like, oh, is it dead or not? Oh, how dead is it? How alive is it? I think the best thing to do is to just go and make things happen. And rather than putting your energy into disputing with people,
right.
put your energy into things where you can build it. So London PM has been around for 16 years now. We're quite a large group. But for the first time this year, we organised a hack day, which wasn't a big deal. Basically, Sue, who's involved with London Hackspace as well, booked a room at the Hackspace, and a bunch of us got together, wrote code together, looked over each other's shoulders, shared a few tips. And that was interesting, but also because it was Saturday, people were coming into the Hackspace who don't use Perl, aren't interested in Perl, and we're like, oh, what are those people doing? And there was a little bit of like, oh, right, there's people in the room doing Perl. And like you said, that's rather than me saying Perl is still alive, and someone saying, no, it's dead, and me going, no, it isn't, no, it isn't, no, it isn't. I think
that's great. And that's exactly how you do the kind of subversion that I was talking about, where you sneak this in to other communities. When I started at MongoDB, they hadn't had a Perl guy in quite some time. But at that time, the way their team was organized, they had a drivers team which was responsible for maintaining all their open source drives. So there's a Ruby one, a Python one, a PHP one, a Java one, a .NET one, all with their own little groups of 1 or 2 or 3 people. And so then I was the Perl guy, and I showed up. And, I started, and I was by myself, and I just started working on it and getting to know the team. But then I'd start to share with people what Perl can do, and we would start talking about, because all of our different projects were trying to do the same thing, which is talk to MongoDB, just in different programming languages. And I'd say, whenever we discuss a new feature, I would say, all right, that's interesting. We want to keep APIs between languages consistent where we can, but we also want them to be idiomatic, right? And so there's a tension there, and I'd say, well, this is the way Perl people would do that. And then, the Python guy would say, oh, that's kind of interesting. And all of a sudden, Perl was informing the programming decisions of these other teams, some in languages that I didn't even know. And that was interesting. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that I think helps. And there's nothing wrong with events like this that are just dedicated to Perl. I just think we need to do more of what you're talking about, which is talking to other people who don't know what Perl can do.
That's pretty much exactly what I want to do. I want to bring next year's Austrian Perl workshop to the city of Linz, where I live. Linz has an awful lot of programmers, but just really a handful of Perl programmers, and all have been friends of mine for many years. So I want to do not only a Perl workshop. I want to learn from the Asians, because they seem to have got the lessons, and reach out to those other communities. So I would very much appreciate any kind of pointers or help or suggestions on how to actually accomplish this.
Here, there's Solve, who's going to organize an OSCC.
You're the... May I talk?
Yes. Absolutely.
I have a lot of things to say, so I'll make it quick because there's been a lot of hands up here, so I'll be short. First about being nice to people, and that stuff. I gave a talk at the Java conference in September, a Java conference called JavaZone. And it was some open source stuff. Afterwards, all the speakers were invited on a trip, and we got to mingle and talk. It was 3 days and about a good time. And everybody who talked with me said, "You're a Perl guy? What are you doing here?" Right. And we got some conversation out of it.
That's great.
And I got several times the thing, "But isn't that a dead thing?" And the way I replied to them was, "No, that's not actually. It's more like what you think has been happening hasn't."
Yeah,
There's been a lot of development in the last 6-7 years, and those people who were very knew what they were talking about, I just told them, "You need to check your sources.
Yes.
You're not informed correctly." And they gave them examples, and they shut up.
Right, and that's great when we can do that.
There was a big point there for me too, also,
Yeah.
and that's that was kind of a sneaky little plan on my side by going to an event where you get, quote, thought leaders, people who go on stage and saying stuff, and just by giving them example that there is interesting stuff happening in the Perl community, gives them some pushback on the bad habits they may have had for several years, saying, "No, Perl, I don't care." And all of a sudden they hear something cool is going on, then they don't visit anymore because that makes them look stupid.
And you're exactly right. And what it comes down to is not that people are against Perl or that they hate Perl. It's just that a lot of them are misinformed.
Yes.
And they're misinformed because just a lot of these people repeat the same FUD and nonsense over and over again.
And that requires people like us. And we don't have an Uncle Google who will do the marketing for us. We have to go out there into the communities, as you say, and actually say, I'm wearing the Perl badge, and yeah, I'm real. I'm not like a figment of your imagination. I know shit, and I can tell you stuff.
You've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. I've sort of been involved in programming probably since about 1966, so I've been through quite a lot of languages. I started, I think, with Perl 4 in about 1995 or something like that, and Perl has been, something I think of the love affair language, and I'm not prepared to give it up. I'm working for a university at the moment who have got a message queue, and they've actually got MongoDB. And what they wanted to do is that they wanted to just use MongoDB to record some things that were taking a long time to do on one of their main databases.
Right.
So they said, "Oh, well, yeah, here you are, Hugh." They'd seen me before, 2 years before. How long is that going to take? It's going to take a couple of months. 2 CPAN modules. I think one's called XML to JSON. The other is called NetStomp, because that's the thing that takes it on back to MQ. And the prototype is done in a day, less than a day. And sorry, this anecdote brings me to what I feel about my version of the evangelism, is what are Perl's strengths, and they're enormous. I mean, CPAN is an enormous strength and an enormous source of frustration, I think, at the same time. The language is expressive, because for example, I grew up with COBOL, and I consider Java to be the COBOL of the 1990s. I'm not going to be a jerk and put Java down, but to me, it's a horrible thing.
And it doesn't accomplish anything to insult Java.
And just to finish off, the only thing that comes near in expressivity is the thing that I supported in France years and years ago called APL.
Yeah.
APL was just really a couple of symbols, and you could invert a matrix that was about, let's say 10 million by 10 million, and in fact I'm not a mainframe computer offline doing that, and I was very unpopular for about 3 days.
I've seen APL and it terrifies me.
So I think my message is there are tremendous positive qualities in Perl, but maybe we need to be a bit more clear about what they are.
Yeah.
I'm not completely clear myself, but I know they're there. I know whether that's keeping me in the Perl community.
And I think a great way to do that is when you can do these kind of cross-technology events, whether it's writing a blog post or going to a non-Perl specific conference and saying, hey man, look what I can do. You know, when I wrote that first post about MongoDB, I wasn't, you know, I was expecting it to be a post for the Perl community, and it ended up being a post for the MongoDB community, which happened to have some Perl in it. And you know, that's really when the light bulb went off for me. Is this is how we get people who don't know the strengths of Perl to see, oh, that's pretty cool. Yes, in the back.
Given that you're looking for ideas, one idea that occurs to me is it's kind of slightly out of the evangelism stage, but I want to know if people try Perl, how long they stay with it. I wonder if there's any way of, and without doing it surreptitiously or without doing it in any way that is in interest, can we put analytics in CPAN, in the CPAN client, or something like that? Is there something we can do to work out, you know, how long people stay with things, how, you know, what?
That's a really interesting
What sort of
idea.
things, you know, do people, I don't know, do people?
I mean, you don't need a login to download from CPAN.
There kind of is a proxy to that, right? Like, I get very frustrated that many CPAN modules are not on GitHub, right? And if you go to GitHub, you can see very clearly how many people have started a project, how many pull requests are there, and how many. And like yesterday, actually, I was working on a module, and like this module had bugs, and there's no way to even get a hold of the guy. And it's not on GitHub, and I'm just like, God, this is so frustrating. And
yeah.
So I send him my patch just by email, and like, doesn't reply, no idea if that email address still works. You know, I'm just like, come on.
And that's a frustrating. And you know, some people have, I mean, philosophical problems with GitHub or Git. You know, I think there's a consensus, at least within the people who are actively developing CPAN stuff. There seems to be a consensus that Git and GitHub is going to be the platform going forward. But there's 20 years of CPAN stuff. You know, some of it is dead, some of it is maintained just by people who aren't interested in learning Git. And that's okay, that, you know, they're not bad people. They've got other priorities, and that's fine. And so sometimes you have to work a little harder, you know, to send them diffs over email. And sometimes they don't respond. And you know what a great thing you can do is, if they don't respond, is steal their modules. You know, the official term is adopt a module, but really you're stealing it. And there's an official process for doing it. You know, you email modules and you say, look, I've tried to get in touch with this guy. He won't respond. You know, give me permissions for the module, and put it on GitHub and upload it to Pause. That's something that I've been meaning to do with a couple modules. You know, I don't have many CPAN modules. I think I've got like 6 or 7 distributions. But there's a bunch of stuff that that I'd be willing to take over. You know, probably within the next few months when I'll have a little more spare time to do it.
I don't know about it, please. How you do it? If you take over a module,
Yeah.
so write a blog about what steps you've done with links to pages.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's the procedure, and I've done this and this.
Yes.
This has already been documented.
Yeah,
has documented this at least twice.
Yeah, there is.
It's still nice if somebody blogs about it.
Right. Yeah, so there is a document that you can find. If you search for adopt a CPAN module, you'll find it. And basically the procedure is, you know, try to get in touch with the listed author. Try to look for other email addresses if you can. You know, if you can search on their name. If they don't respond within, you know, a couple of weeks, you know, or some reasonable time frame, you know, post something publicly, like on blogs.perl or Perl Monks, saying, hey, I'm looking for this guy. Does anybody know how to get in touch with him? I want to send him a patch. And if you still get nothing, then email modules@perl.org. Say, you know, I tried these email addresses. I put this post here. Didn't get any responses. Can I have permissions for this CPAN module? And they'll give it to you. And I don't think I've personally ever seen a request rejected for that. And people do it all the time. And it's not hard. You just, you know, you might have to wait a couple weeks just to make sure nobody's on vacation. But if you don't get anything back, you know, it's an open source thing. You know, it's not, the guy, you know, doesn't own the rights to that, to those CPAN permissions. You know, and if worse comes to worse, occasionally you get a guy who's just going to say, no, I don't want your patch, I don't think it's a bug. And you know what? Then screw it, fork the module. It's open source, fork it, give it a new name, and upload it. You don't need his cooperation to do that. But that's very rare. You know, there's like 1 or 2 guys who engage in that sort of behavior, and you know what ends up happening is people fork the modules. The people who are smiling right now know who I'm talking about.
Just a thought on that, a thing that might keep people from adopting modules would be, oh, then I'm sort of responsible and get loads of work, you know, bug requests. But that's actually not true, because even if you adopt the module just for the one single patch you have and push that to GitHub, you already improved the module. There's no further obligation to do anything. You can just immediately put it out for further adoption by someone else.
And by the way, I don't know how many in here are actual CPAN authors. Raise your hand if you're a CPAN author. All right, so maybe 2/3 of you are, but if you're not, you know, if you don't want to maintain something that you have, you know, say you release something or you adopted a module from somebody else and you did a release and you no longer have time to work on it, but someone starts sending you patches now, you can give them co-maintainer permissions in the module and you say, you do it. And a lot of, you know, if someone took the time to send you a patch or a pull request, they'd probably be happy to do that. And so you don't, there's no obligation for you to do this. You can adopt a module just to do one release and then say, you know, I'm not interested in spending more time on this. And if somebody else comes along, you can say, here's co-maintainer permissions, you do it. And you don't need to go through the pause admins, you can do that yourself. Or you can just ignore them and then maybe someone will adopt it for you. But that, you know, don't do that because you make them wait a couple weeks. Yeah.
I also, I mean, thinking about CPAN and everything like that, this is for programmers who are actually a fair bit into their maturity, if you like. But when you look at other languages, I mean, I look at my son in 1988, when those first little computers came out. First thing we go is we go 10, print hello,
yeah.
20, go to 10.
That's the first thing I wrote too.
You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was actually pretty much how I learned Perl in 1994, 1995, was they were 10-line scripts, because that was all anyone knew how to do then. So there's actually that constituency, which is actually quite well served by Python, because of Pygame and things like that, which I think also needs some attention, I think, for Perl, you know, because actually Perl is pretty fun as that kind of level of language as well.
You know, Perl started out as shell scripting on steroids.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's nothing wrong with shell scripts. And you know, nowadays, if somebody posts a question, you know, with like Perl 4 looking code or really ugly Perl, you know, early Perl 5 looking code, what's the first thing that somebody says is use strict, use warnings. And that's good advice, but it might not be the most helpful advice in all situations. You know, if they're 10 years old, if they're saying, look, you know, I have this 20-year-old Perl script that, you know, worked fine and now there's just this bug in it, you know, that as right as saying use strict, use warnings is, you know, that guy's probably not going to want to rewrite this 100-line Perl script that just needs to move files from here to here. So maybe if the problem is obvious, you lend that guy a hand without, you know, jumping down and saying use strict, use warnings. You can say, hey, anything going, if you write new Perl code, use strict, use warnings. But look, because I'm an experienced Perl guy, I was able to see this bug pretty quickly, and here's how you fix it. And in the future, here's how you avoid that. You turn on strict and warnings. You know, and there's nothing wrong with advocating good coding practices, but if your first instinct is to criticize someone who's asking, you know, a decent question, you know, maybe take it down a notch. It's helpful. Yeah.
I think the thing here is to answer the question first, and then to use strict and warnings.
Yes, exactly, and that's been my philosophy over the past year or so. I've reevaluated my own behavior and that sort of thing, because if it's a good question, and there's a lot of bad questions, and, you know, if it's just you know, some guy saying, hey, how do I solve P equals NP with Perl? You know, downvote, close, you know, whatever. But if it's a good question, someone's saying, hey, you know, here's this code I'm struggling with, here's what I tried. And if it's, you know, If it's something, I don't want to spend a lot of time working on code that doesn't have strict turned on, but if it's something, I've been doing Perl for like 14 years, and there's a lot of stuff that jumps out at me as obvious just because I have more experience. And if it's something like that, I'll say, well, here's your problem, here's how you can fix it. In the future, always make sure you use strict and use warnings. Here are the links to the documentation and reasons why. And I think that is ultimately more helpful than saying, I'm not going to help you with this because you didn't use strict.
There's, in the Perl 6 community, there's this lovely expression, optimize for fun.
Yeah, that's a good expression.
Rule of
yeah.
thumb.
I like that. We might have to steal that in Perl 5.
But there's a lot of cargo code, and it's very noticeable. Yes. Not necessarily in Perl, because my day job isn't Perl. It's another ancient, obsolete business language. And you go to the official developers network. 99% of every question that's asked, you've got dozens of stupid answers that you know immediately won't work. And these are people who are paid big money. And then at the bottom they say, if good, give points, because of course it's this insane patting your back on culture. And actually finding the right answer is very difficult. And it's a problem with Perl. When I just got a current meter, the little electricity. Yeah. And the first example I found for logging that to a database was written in Perl. When I looked at it, and I wanted to die. And it was awful. But that's the first hit on Google, and almost everyone who's never seen Perl is going to see this most awful piece of code that was hacked. And that's the problem that perhaps some of the other communities have managed to get away with. There are nice examples to get some of the beginners in.
And is that like an actively maintained example that you can send a pull request for?
No, it's just on someone's
blog. 10-year-old detritus.
Yeah, and it's just lurking there, and it's repeated because every other link is either a link to it or a copy of it.
This is something I've been curious about. There's a lot of crappy Perl out there, and we all know that you can write terrible code in any language.
Exactly.
I'm curious how big a problem that is in other language communities. And this is because I actually don't know this, because I've seen exactly what you said.
Yeah, I would say... And
I want to know from Python people, I want to know how much horrible, awful Python code is out there. Because I've seen some really bad Python code. And Python's been around as long as Perl 5 has. So it's got to be there somewhere.
I used to be a C programmer, and I've seen some pretty awful C code.
Yes. There's C code that'll make you go blind.
Yes.
Yes. And I would say that almost the entire code base of SAP is unmaintainable even by SAP.
Yeah.
But of course they're charging hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars for that. But it's almost entirely awful. There are bits though that are beautiful, but they're an exception.
We've talked a lot about getting other people who are developing, telling them what's cool about Perl compared to Python, their language. One thing we haven't touched on really is beginners at all, and something I'm seeing is a lot of there's stuff in magazines and newspapers, learn to code. You go to Google and type learn to code, your first page is pretty much all Python, some of it is Scratch, some of it is
Python or JavaScript.
HTML, CSS, yeah. And the nice thing is that there's a website, Code Academy, which you can jump on and you can do Python in your browser. And I mean, it's so accessible. And we don't have that.
Well, we have it Perl 6, at least.
There is that browser thing for Perl 6.
There is Perlito, which runs Perl in JavaScript, kind of.
Well, in Perl 6, for instance, you can in the chat window for /Perl6, hashtag Perl 6, you can. There's several ways to try to run a Perl 6 program, and it will be executed, and you look at the right error message and stuff.
It's just like an eval.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's several versions of that.
Yeah, there's a Perl 5
know better than me.
So how do we get that onto the first page of Google when someone types to learn to code, and they don't type learn to code Perl?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, it's a challenge, and the first step is somebody has to write that content.
Yes.
If I had lots of free time, I would do it. Although I don't know if I'm that good a writer for beginner level stuff. But
at the French Perl workshop, there was this 19-year-old French student who was going for the first time in his life to a Perl event, and he thought, "Wow, wonderful, Perl 6. Yes, I'm going to do that." And 2 months later, he has written Learn Perl 6 in Y minutes on that website, Learn X in Y minutes.
That's great.
So you can do that yourself, and add something to that. Learn Perl 5 in Y minutes, Learn Perl 5 in 5 5 minutes or something.
So it sounds like the answer is find a really energetic 19-year-old with spare time.
Yes.
And they are out there, you know, because I see them at Perl events. It's not all old fogies. Yeah.
Yes, carry on from sort of the beginner aspect and what you were saying about advocating Perl through its use of other technologies. You know, people are going to come, new programmers are going to want to learn how to interact with like modern applications and, you know, APIs and services like that. So I think there's an opportunity there to blog, promote the use of Perl in interactive like
absolutely
API.
I think, yeah, and you know, going off the what I mentioned earlier about, you know, sort of getting in touch with other technologies. You know, I used to a few years ago I was working on a project that used Amazon Web Services, you know, EC2 and S3, and they had links at that time to official APIs for the services. And there are CPAN modules that do it too, but in the Amazon documentation, it wasn't there for a long time. They had like some really sort of crappy demo implementation written in Perl that was in the Amazon documentation. But they didn't have links to, you know, to the libraries that people were actually using. And there was a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he wrote a series of blog posts about using S3 with Perl, using EC2 with Perl, and using all these other Amazon Web Services with Perl. And he would talk about, you know, some of them have multiple CPAN distributions. We would talk about the advantages of each. And he wrote a lengthy series of posts that I saw, I think on Perlsphere or something. And shortly after he did that, Amazon updated their documentation and started linking to these actual libraries. And if you look at the libraries now, you know, they have, you know, Python and PHP and Ruby and Java and Perl. So creating that content, you know, a lot of the blog posts I write are really just sort of to remind myself of something cool that I did. But when you create that content, it has a residual effect. So if you have time to write stuff like that, or, you know, just help people on Stack Overflow by writing detailed answers and stuff like that, that content can be kind of evergreen and really useful going forward.
Yeah, so yes, I think it'd be good to see sort of less blog content about like missing catalyst.
Exactly, right. So, you know, if you're writing a blog, write less about how cool Perl is and write more about here's how you use Perl with whatever the big new thing that people are Googling. You know, here's how you use Perl with RabbitMQ. Here's how you use Perl with Redis, etc.
Well, I think it would be great to, you know, going from that to getting these websites to list Perl as their APIs, which is cool, and then going to, you know, if I saw Perl on Code Academy or Code School or something like that.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm not sure how much time we have. I think we started.
You're 5 minutes late already.
I'm 5 minutes late. All right. So let's do one more comment and.
Well, but may I come back to your what you talked about at the beginning?
Yeah.
Go to all the conferences.
Yeah. As many, well, yes, as many as you can afford plane tickets for.
So, for instance, in January 31, February 1 next year, there will be FOSDEM in Brussels, biggest open source conference in the world.
And there's a big announcement coming at FOSDEM, isn't there?
Yes. Larry Wall will announce the release date for Perl 6. January 31, February 1. Yeah, very original. Never been that before. We will have a whole day in the middle of 25 tracks. There will be one Perl track for one day, which is awesome. And we, small group, including me, is taking care of that for the last 6-7 years now, I think. And there's many more of such conferences, not as big as FOSDEM because I think it's the biggest in the world, 7,000 people coming, but there's so many more conferences that you could go to, submit a talk, and try to have a Perl booth there, try to have a Perl room if they have more than one room, just try to do that. Or get at least a very nice talk submitted into their main track. If you do that, Perl gets a lot of positive attention. People like, oh man, didn't know that, that's cool, that's what you want. There's FOSDEM, there's OSCON, there's the OSDC. Next year there will be an OSDC in Norway that Salving is organizing. There's FOSCON, that's a small little thing in Germany. There's TDOS, small little thing in the Netherlands. We've had some of these things in the UK. In America, there's the Linux Con. I think there's Linux cons all over the world. Switch will talk there as well. Well, the Linux still.
So, I just want to conclude really quickly. Normally, at the end of talks, I say thank you to the audience for listening to me talk at you. But since this was mostly you talking, I want to thank you for talking to me. So thanks for coming. Woo!